Why don't we go ahead and get started? Tonight we're going to go through the medical school status, and we'll follow the same format we've done the last few years. And I'll start off by talking about a really momentous event in the history of the medical school, which was our being placed on probation by our accrediting body back in June of 2011. And in October of 2013, we were removed from probationary status and found to be in compliance with all of our standards. There was still a need for some monitoring of some of the standards, which now, as we are reorganizing LCME standards, have different numbers. But there's been a tremendous amount of work done and a fair amount of success to celebrate. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Aaron McGuffin, Paulette Weiner, Bobby Miller, Jennifer Plymel, Cindy Warren, Linda Holmes, and many, many others for the turnaround for both LCME and ACGME accreditation, as we were on warning for ACGME at the same time that we were on probation from LCME. And it's fair to say that we still have some challenges, and we'll talk about some of them, maintaining our accreditation for ACGME programs, getting new ACGME programs launched. We have an LCME self-study that is about to start, preparing us for a site visit in 2018 and 19. But, you know, it's good. It's certainly something that we should celebrate. And that's the celebration picture I've got in my computer from Match Day a couple of years ago. It's not that they're not happy in the last couple of years, but they seem particularly happy that year. So what does that report really mean? Well, the fact of the matter is we really did accomplish some great things in our curriculum redesign, as well as the move to become more student-centered. But the LCME did point out, and I think accurately so, that we had additional work to do with diversity, transfer students, which is relevant to our work with INTO and St. George's University of London, student debt, which is still a challenge for us, and faculty scholarship, which I'll be discussing a bit more later. I think the first thing I'd like us to think about is who we think we are. Who do we think we are? What do we aspire to be? And if you walk around the halls of the laboratories, the clinical settings, you basically hear the same answer. We're a medical school focused on training primary care doctors, in particular doctors who are going to practice in rural areas. In particular, practicing in rural areas here in West Virginia. That's who we are. That's what we think we're supposed to be doing. That's what we think we're good at. And we like to think that we're a medical school that gives our students great preparation for residency. So how do we assess this? It's not a trivial thing. Accreditation is, you know, again, I celebrate our successes with undergraduate medical education and graduate medical education, but let's be frank, it's a mud standard. You have to be accredited to be a medical school. There's not a lot of wiggle room. If you're not good enough to be accredited, you know that we're not having this talk. Rankings are really not for us but they're still useful, and I'm going to share some data from some of the ranking systems that exist. Our student satisfaction and the performance of our students on licensure exams, I think this is really useful and really necessary, but I'd argue that's also a mud standard. If our kids aren't passing their licensing exams, and if our kids aren't happy with this small student-centered medical school, we're doing something very, very wrong. I think the adherence to our core mission is very important. It is actually pretty easy to assess, since our core mission is to train a workforce for this region of the country. But there's a lag time, and you're not going to find out what changes in your, say, admissions policy does until quite a few years go by, probably long enough for old people like me to forget the question. I'm going to talk a little bit about financial performance. This is incomplete in terms of who we are, but it's important because if we don't have money, we can't do much of anything. And our relevance, this is a really hard one to assess. I will say that I've never had the sense of relevance that I have at this medical school at any other place I've been. I think that we truly matter to this region, to this city, to this state. I think we really, really matter. And we have the awesome responsibility of continuing to do those things that do matter to this group. Okay, if we look at a plot from our graduation questionnaire on overall satisfaction with the medical school, up through until last year, we were consistently a little below the average. Now, the average is a pretty high mark because 5 is, freaking wonderful, and 4 is good. So in general, people at medical school are pretty happy with their medical school. And I'm happy to say last year we actually came up to the national average. But again, understand it's a pretty high bar. And we'll see some of this when we talk about individual clerkships, where in some cases getting to average is pretty challenging. If we look at the satisfaction of our students with the preclinical courses, they are pretty consistently above average in almost every course. With very few exceptions, the green bars are taller than the red bars. And I think that's really to the credit of our basic science faculty and others that are involved in teaching the preclinical courses. I plotted just last year and this year so you could see the trend, or 2014 and the one that says 2, that's last year, it's 2015. I must have had a senior moment when I put the slide together. And I think what you can see is that the perception of our students going from the 2014 to the 2015 graduation questionnaire showed improvement pretty much across the board. And this, I think, is in large credit to the work our curriculum committee's done, as well as the faculty that deliver this material. Moving to the clerkships, and this is 2015 data, you can see that we're, again, above the average in most of the courses. I've got a couple of arrows there because those are the courses that have traditionally suffered or, let's say, underperformed. And you can see that they're coming up towards the mean value, or in some cases exceeding the mean value. For internal medicine, the mean value is a pretty high bar, This scale, 3 is good and 4 is great. So an average value across the country of 3.5 is a tough nut to crack, but internal medicine, as I'll show you in a moment, is moving towards cracking it. Psychiatry is now above average, where it languished below average for some years, and surgery is moving up, but still struggling a little. If you look at this just in terms of percentile, you'll see that with family medicine, we are at the top. We may have the top-ranked family medicine clerkship in the country. Congratulations to our colleagues in family medicine. Internal medicine, not so much, but it's getting better and it's getting stronger, and average at least is in sight. OBGYN and pediatrics are also very, very highly regarded by our students. Psychiatry still has some work to do. This is a year off from the data that I just showed you. So I think they're already making that progress. And surgery is making some progress as well. Again, if we focus just on internal medicine, psych, and surgery, you can see how they've all developed some positive slopes relative to 2013, 2014. Last year, we did a bit better in each of those disciplines. So why is this? Well, even though this doesn't sound like it's got much to do with scholarships, there's a halo effect. And the fact that we're pumping $2 million a year into our student scholarships makes our students happier with pretty much everything, as they should be. And Linda Holmes deserves a shout out for this. I think we have established some major improvements in being more student-centered, and I'd commend Amy and her group for what they've done with student affairs. We've put a lot of effort towards identifying students at risk and working with them towards getting them through medical school. And this is a team effort involving lots of people, including the 4 that I'm calling out on this slide. What I'm really gratified to say we're doing now is we are using data to improve our curriculum and pedagogy. And this is a major step forward, at least from my perspective. In the past, like many institutions, we used anecdote and personal feelings about things to make our decisions. And that's great, but now we're really using data to try to drive the decisions. And Mike McCarthy's done a marvelous job making those data available and accessible to the curriculum committee chaired by Sean Loudon, as well as the Med Ed department, Charles Gullo, and our Vice Dean, Bobby Miller. They've really done yeoman work in moving our curriculum to an even better place. Okay. 2015 U.S. News and World Report didn't make me real happy. Okay? I didn't think we'd be ranked for research unless it was a typo, and there was no typo. But we're also not ranked for primary care, and we're also not ranked for rural medicine. And candidly, this is a shame, because I have absolutely no doubt that we are amongst the best schools in the country at preparing our students for primary care and in training our students in rural medicine. There's a reason the rest of the world doesn't know this, and we'll be talking about that a bit throughout my presentation. We're not writing enough about our experiences. We're not publishing what we're doing. And if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, That's not the right analogy, but you get the idea. We've got to somehow communicate the marvelous things that we're doing and have been doing for many years. And this spills over to our peer assessments. I'm very disappointed to note that our residency director colleagues and our dean colleagues think we're a pretty weak medical school. When they evaluate our graduates en masse, not individual programs talking about an individual resident, because those are always great, but everybody's great. It's Lake Wobegon. When we get the peer assessment of our school from residency directors or from deans or chairs, they don't rank us very high. They rank us substantially below average, and that's something we need to think about. On the NIH rank system, I guess the good news is on a percentage basis we're a little better, because now there's 140 listed and we're 123. We used to be 122 out of 130 something. So, I guess we're moving in the, well, no, not really. We're not really moving in the right direction, but we are taking some steps to move in the right direction. So when we think about who we are, we have to come to terms with the fact that we're not ranked for primary care, and we're not ranked for rural medicine, even though we think we're really good at that. And even though we think we give our students great preparation for residency, the simple truth of the matter is we're considered below average by residency directors and other people that rate medical schools. If you look at our research funding, it's not a very pretty trend. Since earmarks have gone away, we're barely holding our own. And even though we have some individual cases that we can get really excited about, the overall trend is not one to inspire a lot of celebration. Now, I suppose you could look at this as not so terrible, because we are definitely in a rich getting richer, poor getting poorer environment, and holding our own is no small feat. But this is a trend I'd certainly like to see change. And if you look at where we are from the perspective of training people who are going to participate in medical discovery, well, on the one hand, we have a very small number of graduates, which lowers our impact there altogether. Our grant support, again, is in a very low part of the curve. And the number of graduates who become faculty are small, because very few of we don't graduate that many students to begin with. If you look at it on a percentage basis, about 1 in 5 of our students goes on to a career in academic medicine, many of them here, and that's a little bit below average on a percentage basis. Scholarship was one of the things cited by the LCME, and since that citation, we've responded with an increase in our production of papers and book chapters. Although there's always some underreporting in these data, and if I waited till next week, I'd probably get some different numbers for 2013 and 14 as well as 15 when people remembered to put in their papers. The simple truth is we've had about a doubling of our scholarly output, but it isn't continuing to increase. It went up in 2012, and it's been more or less sustained, but not increased from there. And to be very frank, it's not at a really competitive level for medical schools. In an effort to improve our research infrastructure, we've done a lot of things with our graduate school. We named Drs. Eggleton and Green as our co-directors. Diana Maui serves as the coordinator. There are new rules for taking PhD students. There's a brand new curriculum for our PhD students as well as MS students. We are recruiting some new funded laboratories to our campus. And Al Shikketti's put together a database so we can track these data and move from anecdote to real data, which I think is very helpful. And I see the graduate school as really an important asset for us in terms of improving our scholarship. So are we doing any better? Well, yeah, we are. We have a lot of new grant submissions, and Dr. Sundaram just put in a COBRA grant, which I say a prayer for every night. We've gotten a number of new grants of the R15 variety and several R01s. Dr. Sundaram currently has 2 R01s. I won't say anything else nice about you, Uma, but that's certainly something that should be pointed out. And the largest grant we have here at Marshall is Gary Rankin's Embry grant, which is great. We have a very substantial increase in the amount of clinical research studies that we're doing, and Todd Davies deserves credit for orchestrating that. And we've had the good fortune to have several high-impact papers in the last few years. One in the New England Journal of Medicine, and our group had a paper in Science this last year. Looking at the curve we just discussed, we have had a sustained increase in scholarship, and I think that's very positive. And I'm very, very excited about the success that Darshana and her editorial board has had in launching the Marshall Journal of Medicine, which I see as a really important vehicle, not only for our residents and students and faculty to learn about, to have as a place to publish some of their work, but also to learn about peer review and become better writers through their work as reviewers of scientific articles. I think it's fair to say we still have a long way to go on the research and scholarship front. Okay, who comes to the Joan C. Edwards School of Medicine? Other than a dip in West Virginia residents that we had when we were on probation, we are typically populated mostly by West Virginia residents. And although the economics are such that, Matt Straub and Buffy will yell at me for saying this, I'm really happy that when this year's data come in, we're going to be looking like we did back in the late 90s. Is that a fair statement, Cindy? We're looking at a cadre of students that's going to be largely West Virginia students. We've been able to improve the diversity of our population, and with the new BSMD program, we're finally going to get a bump in females, which for some reason we've been crummy at attracting. And it's not related to our admissions committee because it's the number of applicants that's lower than the number of male applicants. And I'm darned if I understand it. But in the BSMD program, it is absolutely the reverse. Most of the top students that we've accepted so far from last year and this year are women. So we'll try to even that out, albeit over time. This slide simply shows you that the GPA and MCATs have been pretty stable. The MCAT has changed now, so we're going to have a new type of score to report. But in general, the the performance of our students has been fairly consistent over the years. And it's frankly lower than many of our competitors. At the bottom, I've got some of the top schools down just for reference. Penn or Wash U has a median MCAT of 38, where ours is 28. And but even WVU, Wright State, Louisville, University of Kentucky, and Toledo, which I consider our peer group, they're actually selecting a class of students that has a slightly higher GPA and MCAT than our students have. Well, why is it that we're picking the West Virginia students? It certainly isn't because of all the money we're getting from the state. I can tell you that right now. All right, and that number doesn't look like it's going anywhere but south. But it's our core mission. Our core mission is to train people who are going to practice in this region, and our odds are just much better if they're West Virginia residents than if they aren't. And this slide shows the story. Okay. Medical school debt was one of the things that the LCME cited. We are doing a lot to reduce debt. We seem to be moving in the right direction. This current year is going to be a little bit of an aberration because so many of the kids are out of state. But in general, we're at the same level of WVU and considerably lower than the osteopathic school. Our kids are doing much better on step one than they were in the 2008-2010 period. And in fact, this last year, our pass rate bumped above the national average. Same for step 2 CK. There was a problem back in the early 2000s, but we were more consistently solid with step 2 CK than step 1. Step 3, we're always off a few years because our graduates take it during their internship, but we're about average. And step 2 CS, I show this slide because we had a dip 2 years ago, which Amy and others addressed with major changes to the way we do clinical skills instruction. And because of that, we had a 100% pass rate this last year. I can't help but show some data because I like this stuff, right? So if you take a plane predicting scores on step 1 and step 2 based on MCAT and GPA, you can see that for step 1, our Marshall dot is substantially above the plane. The kids do better here than you'd predict they do based on their MCAT and GPA. For step 2, it's buried in the plane. It's not below it, but it's not above it either. It's right where you'd predict it to be based on those parameters. So our school preferentially accepts West Virginia residents, and because of this focus on a small applicant pool, we have a lower entry MCAT and GPA than most other schools. Our students are a little above average in their confidence in the medical school experience, and the clerkships that have had troubles in the past have all shown considerable improvement. Interestingly, I didn't show you these data, but it's true. Our clerkships, which are really well received by the students, tend to have higher average shelf exam performances, which means you don't have to make the grading easy to get them to like you. In fact, if they like you, they'll probably do better on their exams. Our students score about the national mean for Step 1 and Step 2, and that's a little better for Step 1 than we'd anticipate based on their GPA and MCAT. In terms of our mission regarding the West Virginia workforce, it turns out that Joan C. Edwards School of Medicine graduates choose primary care residencies more often than West Virginia University graduates, and a little below the osteopathic school, which I take as positive, not the less than the osteopathic school, but the fact that more of our graduates are going into primary care than their counterparts at WVU. If you look at where they ultimately practice, and these are old data because the Higher Education Planning Committee doesn't do a report card every year anymore. Based on our last report card, we did about the same as WVU or the School of Osteopathic Medicine in terms of placing primary care docs in West Virginia, but a little bit less well at placing them in rural West Virginia. If we look at this on a national level, we are at the top of the country in terms of the percentage of our graduates that go into primary care. And we're above average at students staying and practicing in state. We're substantially above average for students that practice in a rural area. And we are at the top of the charts for our graduates practicing in underserved areas. And I think these are facts that we can be very, very proud of. My former boss told me that money is only the second most important thing, but without it you can't do the most important thing, whatever that is. And I'll give Lloyd Jacobs credit for that quote. If you look at the financial trend, you'll see a couple of very dramatic things. First of all, our practice plan has increased its collections and its contribution to our finances very substantially over the last 5 years. We've had roughly a $15 million increase in collections that still appears to be on the increase. Our docs are working very hard. We're seeing more support from hospital activities, and again, with due respect to our colleagues at Cabell Huntington Hospital and St. Mary's Medical Center, this isn't a gift. This is in exchange for services, and these services are valuable and constitute hard work, and we're grateful to have these dedicated partners, but our docs are working very hard. We're pretty flat in terms of government support, and that's actually misleading because blended into the government support is the upper payment limit correction on our Medicaid billings, which again reflects effort by our clinicians. Grants and contracts, I showed you before. It's flat with a little decrease. Our overall endowment has come up a bit, but could use some work. And you'll notice tuition is pretty flat since we haven't raised tuition, nor have we increased our class size. If you look at our medical school compared to medical schools in general, we're a little bit more dependent on our practice plan than most medical schools. We're a lot more dependent on hospital services than most medical schools. We still have more state support as a percentage of total than most medical schools, because most medical schools, it's gone away. Grants and contracts is an area where clearly we've got some work to do. Now, if you put this in a different perspective and look at the total dollars to an average medical school, you can see there's actually room to move everywhere, because even though on a percentage basis our practice plan contributes a lot, it's not making the same total dollar contribution that other other medical schools get from their practice plan. Same with hospitals. With grants, you can see the huge discrepancy. If you look at our total numbers over time, we've managed to have a positive gap between our net revenue and our net expenses, and this has positioned us to do some good things for the medical school and for the university, but you'll see that this gap is getting more narrow over time. And in fact, if we look at it as a presentation of margin, we were in the 4.5% range for 2012 and 13, and we're just under 1.5% margin in 2015. Our docs are working hard. There's no doubt about it. If you look over the last 4 years, you'll see that in virtually every department there's a positive trend. And most of the bars in the last couple of years are above the 50th percentile, which I have as 100%. It's 100% of the 50th, or the median MGMA number. Now, this number is not academic MGMA, it's total MGMA. So this is comparing us not only to other medical schools, but other practice plans as well. Our docs are working very hard, and they're working very hard across the board. In some cases, it's been like that for a very long time, but I got to point out the absolutely incredible turnaround that Suzanne Holroyd has catalyzed in psychiatry. Kudos to the Marshall Health leadership, Buffy Hammers, Joe Werthammer, Larry Dial, Josh Dorsey, Matt Straub, and others, especially our clinical chairs, our partnership with Cabell Huntington Hospital, and to a somewhat lesser degree, St. Mary's Medical Center has really helped us do this. And we've got a number of new initiatives and partnerships that are helping our finances and keeping us poised to persevere into the future. We've developed provider-based clinics, 340B pharmacies. We're now doing an initiative in Taze Valley, and I heard something about the hospitals getting together. I don't want to say more, for a chance of jinxing it. So, what are we and what do we aspire to be? We're a small allopathic medical school with a focused mission to serve West Virginia and the Appalachian region with a motivated, engaged faculty. Our research footprint is small, and the scholarly output of our faculty is substantially lower, on average, than that of our reference group, other allopathic medical schools. We're not an osteopathic medical school. We're an allopathic medical school. We are not as scholarly as most allopathic medical schools. We're relatively busy clinically, and we function as a very important player in healthcare delivery in southwestern West Virginia with considerable relevance to this Huntington region. We strive to provide a student-centered experience which is effective at training students to begin their medical careers, and all data that we are collecting suggests that we're succeeding in that aspiration. We face some challenges. Research grants will continue to be competitive, and there is apparently an increasing preference for the top research centers. The leadership in the National Institutes of Health have made no secret for their preference to fund a small number of high-performing research centers rather than distribute money more broadly. I think it's a terrible mistake. It's self-serving to say that, but I really think that's a bad way to spend money, and we have to get as much from our federal representatives as we can to prevent that from being effectuated. Our state support is shrinking by nearly $1 million a year for the last few years, and this is concerning. It's concerning on a number of different levels. I think to some degree, like many political things, the only thing that will stop it from continuing will be if we have enough people screaming bloody murder. Not that I'm encouraging anyone to go scream bloody murder, but if it's painless for the legislature to cut our budget every year, I think they'll just keep doing it. On the flip side, our student debt, which is still at a essentially average level for public medical schools, despite our low tuition, will make major increases in tuition counterproductive to our mission. So we're kind of betwixt and between. Healthcare dollars in the future will come from a blended environment, essentially forcing us into the managed care business. And the teaching hospitals will have significant challenges which will impact the School of Medicine. So what do? Do we get bigger or do we get smaller? I think we get bigger. I think that the pros of getting bigger are good things. And although there are some cons, I think the pros outweigh the cons, especially the relevance to the community, which is really one of the special things about Marshall School of Medicine. You could make the argument to become smaller and just have a lower budget, but how can I put it? That lack of relevance to the community, to my mind, makes it a pretty clear question that we want to get too big to fail. We want to be so important to this region that people can't imagine doing without the Marshall University School of Medicine. I think the good, we have a very noble mission with great relevance to the community. We perform a great deal of the clinical care in this region efficiently and effectively. We are striving to be student-centered, and we're doing a better and better job of it. We've got tremendous loyalty of our alumni. Our teaching is improving and our students are doing well. And we've made enormous improvements We've been used as an example to other LCME troubled institutions. One of the leadership trainees is going to be shadowing us next week to learn how to run a medical school because the LCME thinks we're doing a good job at running a medical school. The merger, I said I wouldn't talk about it, so I lied, but I'll talk about it shortly. This merger could be a great thing for us. It would constitute a huge improvement in our clinical teaching laboratory and avoid the risk of somebody else buying St. Mary's. And God willing, it'll go through. We got to face the fact that we're not as good as we'd like to think we are. The peer assessments, that's very disturbing to me, and the fact that our national reputation is quite different from our self-image in the areas of primary and rural care. Our research infrastructure is still weak and it needs work. And bluntly, we are on the cusp of inadequate scholarship. We're at that point where some of our residency applications in the future may be turned down for a lack of scholarship. We may see residencies that are approved get in trouble for a lack of scholarship. I think that's untenable. And I think that this is also the reason that other schools and other places don't appreciate us for how good we are at what we do so very well, which is provide rural care, primary care, and relevant care to this region of the country. Okay, so how do we improve our scholarship? Well, I think one step is to enhance our basic science research base, and this is not only internal faculty development, but we're recruiting external faculty into biochemistry and anatomy, and we're going to spend some money. Our aim is to develop a MUD standard of 25% of our basic science faculty having salaries, that salary portion on extramural grants. The national average is probably closer to 50%, but I'll be delighted if we can get to 25%. We're going to make our graduate school better, and we're in the process of doing so. I think it's important that we, each and every one of us, embrace our personal obligation to be scholarly. We're medical school faculty. If we teach, write about how we're improving our teaching. If we're primarily clinical, write about how we're doing our clinical practice. I'm going to pick on my dearest friends in neonatology now. We are the world's experts on neonatal abstinence syndrome, and nobody outside of this room knows it. That just can't continue. And on an administrative level, if we have good programs, let's write about it. Let's talk about it. That is how you get to be known on a national or international level. So I challenge our faculty to continue to evaluate and discuss the quality of the teaching, as well as develop goals and focused areas for improvements in scholarships. Everybody should be writing something. We need to connect with the community, and even though we've been very successful at our practice expansion, we probably need to put a little more effort into putting the friendly back in friendly competition. I think that our community colleagues can help us with our teaching as well as the research and clinical missions. This is the same slide I showed last year, but darn it, I really mean it. I really mean it. Everybody writes something. Every clinical faculty writes up a case report with a resident or student. Every educator writes something about the courses that they're running. every researcher, listen, if you're not writing at least a paper a year, you're not getting your grants renewed. So for lots of reasons, you need to be, prolific. And even our administrators, let's write about the programs that we're putting together and are effectuating, because they're good programs and the rest of the world needs to hear about it. Beyond our full-time faculty, I think scholarships should be encouraged amongst our volunteer faculty. And this should have implications for promotion and tenure, or even promotion in the volunteer track. Whether we're going to actually go over the cliff in the clinical arena of linking compensation to scholarship, I don't know. But candidly, it's something we probably need to talk about at a departmental level. This is something that really threatens our very existence. So, develop collaborative projects, individual goals discussed with mentors, colleagues, and chairs, discussed at department meetings, look for opportunities. We need to strive to be more scholarly. This is the hardest slide of the night, and it's really true. If you look at teaching, research, and administration as things that compete with clinical work or whatever it is you're paid to do for your time, it will be difficult to improve because everybody is working hard. I get it. I know everybody's working hard. You got to look at it all being one mission. That teaching, research, practice, and administration are just different facets of what you do. And all of it is worthy of being communicated to your colleagues around the country and around the world. Our medical school is critical to the region, and it's effective at its mission, which I truly believe is noble. The improvements we've seen in our clinical service and teaching have been quite substantial and gratifying. I'm very excited about the merger I said I wouldn't talk about, but I have to end on the cautionary note that a persistent weakness in our scholarship continues to threaten our reputation, limit our capacity for expansion, and ultimately our very mission. Thank you all for your attention.